Well, thank you all for joining us, all who are joined now and going to join in the future. It's really my very, very great pleasure this evening to have as my guest and fellow conversant, Dr. Bruce Daggy. Bruce is a valued colleague and an even more valued friend. We have spent quite a few years working together when he was Chief Science Officer with Shackley Corporation. And even during that time, beyond our Shackley Association, we worked together in a number of sustainability arenas. I was involved in the development of a company in San Francisco. He was instrumental in getting Shackley Corporation to be part of a sustainability circle, also the city of Pleasanton. So as they say, we go back a long way. And Bruce, I have to tell everyone about the first time we met. We were at a conference in Chicago that I had helped co-sponsor with one of my colleagues for many, many years. And I sat next to this fellow named Dr. Bruce Daggy, who had just come on as the Chief Science Officer of Shackley. So we kind of chit-chatted and did small talk. And it became very clear that he was a sustainability guy. And so I felt like I had kind of met another member of the secret society. And so since that moment, we have been pretty much joined at the hips intellectually and in all of the activity that we have done together, which is a lot of conference calls, a lot of live meetings all over the country, and a lot of fun. So tonight we're going to have a serious conversation. We're going to have a lot of fun with it. We're going to have a very serious conversation. And it's going to be about what's going on in our world, what's going on in our environment, and specifically, what's our individual responsibility as citizens? What actually can we do? And we were talking before we went live, talking about there's really kind of two levels, right? There's things that we can do in our personal life, and that's important. But as you pointed out, Bruce, that's not going to get the job done. If we're going to realize our promise as a species and take care of the earth and take care of the biosphere and take care of all of the other species, we need to act collectively. And as Dana Meadows said, we have exactly enough time if we start right now. And so, Dr. Bruce Daggy, let's talk about your evolution, the evolution of your thinking in this regard, because things have changed, haven't they?
They have. And Bob, thanks again for having me on. And by the way, I think at that first lunch meeting that we had, my arm was in a cast, wasn't it? I think that was right after I'd gone over my handlebars, and I was doing one-handed eating that initial conversation between us.
I think so, but I guess it was the next year that you actually, we have found out you were a more than a creditable blues guitar player. So
Yeah.
I don't think it was that one. I think it might have been the next year.
Yeah,
Right?
the fingers came back. But anyway, so yes, my background, as you know, is in biology, and my doctorate's nutritional biochemistry. But so I had an interest in biological systems from a fairly early age, and developed this career in nutrition, which took me into healthcare, and that's been my main focus for the last 40 years now. So pretty deep and sustained interest. But in parallel, in my mind, there was always this other thing, where I had an interest in sustainability, an interest in the environment. And I think that was partly the atmosphere in which I grew up, starting with my mother, who had lived through the Depression and World War II in England, and therefore was very thrifty by nature. Never throw something away if you can still get some use out of it, and try to leave things better than you found them. And I'm quite sure we were the first family in our neighborhood to use the new recycling center when it finally opened, back when you had to tie all your newspapers in a bundle, separate your glass by color, crush your tin cans separately from your aluminum cans, all that, take the labels off first. We filled up the car with our recycle and took it every week or two to the recycle center. So I had the orientation from my mother, I was in high school during the first Earth Day. You might remember I have that famous Pogo cartoon on the wall. We've met the enemy and he is us. That's from the second Earth Day. So, I had this long time interest in the environment, but I considered that, okay, there's my healthcare nutrition stuff and there's this environmental stuff, and I'm interested in both, but here's my career. And that's just a personal interest and advocation. And it was really, I'm not the smartest guy, I guess, because it was a very slow dawning in my mind that really they're the same thing. It's the same thing. You do not have human health without environmental health. Right. You don't. We're part of the ecosystem. We're not above the ecosystem. We don't domineer, or we shouldn't try to domineer the ecosystem. We're part of it. We're part of the fabric of life on this planet. And, of course, going back, you mentioned Dr. Shackley. Dr. Shackley, that was, where he came from. And so the whole Shackley connection resonated with me in that sense. But it finally dawned on me. And it's not just that, of course, as biological creatures, we need clean air, we need clean water, but we actually need the web of life around us. And as we dismantle the web of life, we dismantle what gives us health. So we really need to pay attention to what's going on in nature. And these two interests of mine, slowly it occurred to me, they were one and the same thing. The first time I retired in 2009, I thought, well, maybe I'll start a second career in something environmental. And then, again, gradually it dawned on me that, well, that's where I've always been, and I just need to figure out how to express it as a unified concept.
Yeah. So so your career spanned 16 years at GlaxoSmithKline as the head of nutrition there.
Well, among other roles, yeah, I was. That was my major stop in the healthcare industry. It's big pharmaceutical company, but also had consumer healthcare and nutrition. And my interest was always trying to get the pharma guys to pay attention to nutrition, which really wasn't something they wanted to do.
Yeah, it doesn't meet the business model, and so that's why.
Exactly. Yeah. No. It's kind of a different mindset, sadly.
Very much.
Sometimes cracks appear in that wall, but it's pretty much a separate mindset.
Yeah. So let's take an inventory of where we are, because I think, unfortunately, that which really should be a common understanding that we have, that common science-based understanding, has become, unfortunately, fairly politicized, where I think, as Albert Einstein pointed out, I can't quote the entire quote, but something like every coachman and every so-and-so has an opinion, and whether that opinion is favorable to the theory of relativity or not depends on their political party. So this has been going on for a long time. It will go on forever, I'm sure, but it's very unfortunate. In fact, it's very unfortunate when we're dealing with existential threats. We're dealing with carbon building up in the atmosphere, and we're dealing with something that Naomi Klein has written extensively about and documented, a sixth major extinction, where massive numbers of species are going to not be there. And we can say, well, so who cares? You got 50 frogs, now you got 30 frogs or 20 frogs, and you got this many bugs, you only got that many bugs. So what's the difference? I'm still going to be here. I can still go to the grocery store,
right,
and get my food and drive in my car and go to work and doing everything. That species extinction thing doesn't touch me, but it does.
Yeah, it very much does. And by nature, I think I'm an optimist, and I believe that as we understand things, we will address them. And if you had asked me 15, 20 years ago, would we be in this position of being the cause of a major extinction? I would have said, no, we're smarter than that. We're absolutely smarter than that. And again, I think it's because in the time in which I have grown up, we have developed a tremendous amount of environmental wisdom. You know, go back to, you know, Rachel Carson and Silent Spring, and we had this very useful tool called DDT, and we decided to stop using it, you know, for very good environmental reasons. We had rivers that were catching on fire, and we had air that was killing people, and we didn't understand where smog came from. And under Nixon, of all people, we created the Environmental Protection Agency, and the river stopped burning, and smog started getting better. And, you know, London was no longer a sooty, you know, coal covered city. You know, we saved the California condor. You know, we made big progress in areas great and small. And I just saw that, you know, continuing. We had an international coalition that came together, understood what was driving the hole in the ozone layer, and we fixed it. Wow. You know, as inconvenient as that was to fix, because we all like refrigeration and we all like air conditioning, we found a way to do it. So if you would, again, ask me, you know, 15, 20 years ago, you know, what sort of trajectory are we on? I would have said, we seem to be showing good rational behavior, right? And we can just keep doing that and things will be okay. But the biosphere doesn't lie, right? If things were really okay, if they were really okay, if we were really getting things under control at the rate that we need to do, we would not be having a major extinction event right now. So there's no debate. There's no debate. When that is happening, when the web of life is unraveling, we're not acting fast enough. And it should really be a call to action to everybody. And so again, I'm going to flip back to my optimistic side. We got a lot of the tools that we need. Right. It's not a question of we've got to invent something. I mean, there are some things that we will invent and will be very useful, but we've got a lot of the tools today. It's a question of the will to use them, to walk a little more lightly on this planet, to not exceed the carrying capacity of this planet, to the detriment not just of the frogs we're not going to have anymore, but to the detriment of ourselves.
Well, I think that's kind of a major point, isn't it? That while we have this cortex that gives us the capacity to have a sense inside of ourselves, even though this is entirely rental property, right? No one made their eyeball or their brain or their nose or their knee or their toenail or their capacity, their intellectual, emotional capacity. No one made any of that. We're living inside, in essence, rental property, but we have this capacity in our brain to feel like we're separate. And it's a good thing because that gives us a sense of agency, right? If we don't develop that sense of agency, if we don't rebel against our parents in our early teens and we don't kind of go for it, then we never develop the capacity to actually operate in the world. But we can't stop there, right? We can't stop there in late adolescence where we want to be the best wrestler and the best this and the best that and beat this person and differentiate. That's really important. But then we have to come together, don't we? We have to start understanding the value of being in community. I didn't bring the book over. I probably should have. It's called Collaborative Advantage. The son-in-law of one of my best friends wrote this incredible book about even in business, the hard-edged area of business. If you rely only on the intellectual property inside your company, you're doomed. Mm-hmm. Because with the web of information, the whole world, or even a chunk of the world, is like way smarter than you are. So if you learn how to collaborate rather than simply compete on the basis of your intellectual property, you're way better off. Well, if we extend that out to us as a species, we're just a species. Yeah, we're really a special species. We got a big old brain, or we got a really well-developed brain, a brain that's so developed that we get to feel differentiated from nature. We get to feel that I am me and nature is that, and they're not the same. And that, I think, from a deep philosophical, we could go down rabbit hole and stay there all night.
Right.
But from a deep philosophical level, that's the issue, isn't it? We need to somehow redevelop, in a sense, or as Fred Kirschman says in his beautiful book, redevelop an ecological conscience.
Mm.
We have to develop a relationship with the world, which is realistically what it is. We're a species, and species can go extinct.
Right.
And the world doesn't need us. The world doesn't need us.
I hear actually two things there that you're saying. I mean, we have tended to have what some philosophers have called a transactional relationship with the biosphere, with the earth. I mean, extracting and dominating the earth, and we need a more compassionate, connected understanding of our true relationship to the earth. So there's that. But within the species, you also raised that idea of really individualism versus community. And one story that makes me think about, many of us in high school or college would have read that famous essay by Emerson on individuality, the primacy of the self, and marching to your own, the beat of your own drum.
Right.
And he wrote that when he was in his 30s, or he published it when he was in his 30s. I don't know when he started writing it, but assuming in his 30s. And a lot of us read it in high school or in college. So when we're in our late teens or early 20s at most. And man, does that resonate when you're about 20 years old, like, yeah, man, I'm going to do my own thing. Don't tell me what to do. I'm going to do my own thing. And so when I read that, when I was a 20-ish something year old, boy, did that just sound like absolute truth to me, right? Well, as part of a corporate development exercise, I had to read it again when I was about 50 years old. I was taking a class taught by a professor of philosophy at Oxford University. Okay. And he had us read it. And obviously he expected this to still resonate with us. And I read it and I said to him, but he got smarter, didn't he? I mean, this is Emerson. I thought Emerson was supposed to be a smart guy. I mean, that's just stupid. And so I went and met with an Emerson scholar. Yep. And I said to her, tell me, I mean, what do you make of this? And she said, oh, he wrote that when he was young. Read all of his late essays. They're all about community. They're all about the importance of community. And I did go, so I went back and read and I said, okay, the man grew. That's good to know. That's good to know. And we do have to strike that balance. I mean, okay, Mozart was a genius, right? Individual genius. But if you appreciate Mozart today, it's because there have been a lot of teachers since Mozart died, and luthiers, and musicians, and string makers, and sheet music publishers that have allowed you to understand that Mozart was a genius. His genius doesn't stand alone. None of our genius stands alone. None of our mediocrity stands alone. And we absolutely need to build this sense of community to solve some of the problems that we face. So individual actions, if we let's get back to the environment. Individual actions are important and they're useful, and they are a model for the behavior of others, and all that. It's all good. But we absolutely need collective action as well, or we're not going to turn the ship fast enough.
Right. And so let's go there with the whole issue of a changing climate. Now, if you look at every science foundation like NSF or any of the collective bodies of any country in the world, you'll see a unanimity of understanding as the climate models get more and more and more sophisticated, like my friend, Dr. Charlie Stanier up in U of I, has this phenomenal talk about, how much more precise the apparently 19 different models, maybe more now, that say the same thing, that the climate is changing, and it's not changing because of a wobble on the earth or sun flare or the solar flares, anything like that. It's changing for anthropomorphic reasons. We have entered the Anthropocene, where our actions, and that so violates so many of our feelings, like, well, couldn't possibly be, and B, it's really inconvenient. I mean, that messes up my whole deal, As one politician I know here in Iowa said, well, if we do something radical to deal with this, radical meaning as in root, something at the root, well, that means we're going to have to change things, and people don't want to change things. So we clearly can't do that.
Wow.
So kind of what's going on with that? What's going on with the state of the science, Bruce, from your side? I know you're not an atmospheric scientist, but you are a scientist of great merit. And I am going to have Dr. Stanier on, and we're going to talk about the models. He's going to make his presentation so that we can just truthfully go to what is actually happening. I can't imagine another arena where there's such a unanimity of opinion among the people who study this, and still have such a vast confusion that's been created. So tell us about that. Let's go there.
Of course, some of the confusion is duplicitous. Some of the confusion out there is because very, very similar to what we experienced with the tobacco companies, right? There are people out there looking at their own short-term interests and sowing confusion. But there's also truth that the models of what's going to happen to the atmosphere are imperfect. Sure. No one knows really how much things are going to change and how quickly. The models aren't that perfect. But I read an interesting article by someone who spent a good part of his career working at the think tanks that were denying climate change for, I don't know, he worked for 15 years or so, opposing the view that there was human activity significantly changing the climate. And he has now changed his views and written a book saying, he was wrong. And wrong because very small change, to the average temperature, well, we can probably handle that. It won't be easy, it won't be pretty, but we can probably handle it. But if we're talking several degrees, if we're talking 3 or 4 degrees, it's absolutely catastrophic. There's no model out there that suggests that wouldn't be horrific, okay? And you have to choose your actions based on what might happen, right? So the fact that might happen, that the models are saying that could happen, and biological systems cannot adapt that quickly to radical change. The possibility that could happen makes it imperative that we take steps so that it doesn't happen. And if it turns out that the models that said it was going to happen were overestimates, we still get cleaner air. We still get cleaner water. We still get energy security. We still get a lot of things that we want. We just maybe, would have been lucky anyway in terms of the worst case scenario, but it's not like the money is wasted. It's not like the effort is wasted. We're still going to get multiple benefits by taking those steps. So you have to consider it's asymmetric. If the reality is, 100 years from now, it's only going to be a half a degree Celsius warmer if we do nothing. I don't think that's true. First of all, I think it's worse than that. But if the models were wrong enough that that's true, then it's still not going to do harm if we, today start putting less carbon in the atmosphere because we're changing the way that we do transportation. We're changing the way that we generate power. It's not a bad thing. Eventually, we're going to have to do it anyway. There's not an infinite amount of oil in the ground, right? So eventually we have to do it anyway. It was, well, not quite 100 years ago that Edison said, I hope we're not going to wait till we run out of oil before we start using the power of the sun. I think it was about 1931, 1933, he said that. Well, of course. And now the price of those technologies has come down so much. We have solar on the roof. Ann and I walked by several schools out here the other day. They have solar on the roof. The city hall at Livermore has solar on the roof. A lot of my neighbors have solar on the roof. We're not all doing it because it's costing us money. We're doing it because it's saving us money, and it's also good for the planet. And so that's very fortunate. That's, that the technology has matured to that point. And that's what I was saying earlier, that a lot of the solutions are right here. We're right here. We know how to do it. We know how to do agriculture better. We know how to do transportation better. We know how to do power production better. We know how to save water. There's a whole lot of these threads where the technologies are already mature, and several others that we can see the trajectory they're on, like energy storage, where within a few years, the technology is going to be mature. So again, the optimist in me, we just have to get on with it.
Right. And I think that's a key point, that as you rightly pointed out, the decarbonization of soil, which we want to probably talk about, the idea of taking carbon out of soil, which means that we go from a beautiful, rich prairie soil that in many areas in Iowa is 8 feet, 10 feet thick. That is taken since the end of the last ice age
to build
that up. And we only have 8 or 10 feet of it. And we're losing in Iowa a very measurable amount of soil each year. In fact, I think we have the latest estimates is we burn through about half of our topsoil. We'll talk about things that don't regenerate that quickly. We won't, once we run out of topsoil, we run out of food. Once we run out of food, we run end of the game.
Right.
So one of the things that I really love to think about in looking at this whole issue of species extinction and using the precautionary principle, as you pointed out, what if the models are wrong? What if they're overestimating? Great. We get non fossil fuel fleet. Isn't that a good thing? Yeah, it's a good thing. It's a good thing because there's all kinds of externalities and costs beyond extra carbon in the atmosphere from drilling from oil and all that. So, but the big thing, since I'm in an agricultural state now, and the organization that I work with, Sustainable Living Coalition, has taken a real interest in the whole idea of regenerative farming and how at one stroke you are able to draw carbon out of the atmosphere back where it belongs into the ground, and properly carbonized soils are healthy soils that can grow healthy plants. So you have to use fewer pesticides and all that. I don't know whether Russ is on tonight, but my friend Russ Concert was the head of technology innovation for Shell Oil for 16 years. He was the person who looked at breakthrough. He ran the Game Changer program. All of the breakthrough technologies, anything, carbon capture, anything that Shell looked into, that was his brief. And then he went to a seminal talk, a TED Talk, very famous TED Talk by Alan Savory, a biologist from South Africa. Many people have been influenced by that TED Talk. He was apparently in the audience. And at the end of the thing, he said, okay, I have great respect, which I think all of us have respect for fossil fuels. Fossil fuels given us the civilization we had. Without that concentrated energy, we wouldn't have what we have. So, but we need to oftentimes move beyond a particular technology when it plays out or starts having negative feedback loops, and we move beyond. That's what we're doing. It's not a political thing. It's just a practical thing. And so he decided that he would spend his time building soil. So he, in the achingly wonderful company name he created Standard Soil.
Right.
And they do intensive paddock grazing, beef cattle, which turns out to be one of the best ways to mend soil and drive carbon back into the soil. So let's talk about that, because I know that's an interest of yours. And let's actually talk about a little bit after we do that about what you've done with your home in Pleasanton, how you have walked your talk.
Right. So actually, I posted a couple of things today on putting carbon back in the soil. And again, this is one of those areas where we're learning how to mimic nature.
Yep.
And you're absolutely right. I mean, that all that wonderful topsoil you have in Iowa is a result of herbivores, walking that land, eating the grass and moving on, fertilizing the grass as they go. Over many years building up that deep topsoil. Well, we can mimic that system. And I posted a couple of things today, one of them that had to do with that, using herbivores and moving them from pasture before they stay too long, before they eat the grass completely away, but let them have that first bite, move them on and let the grass come back up. And of course, the grass is putting down roots and sending nutrients down to the roots to feed the microbes in the soil, and you get more and more carbon left in the soil. So that's one technique. And then I also posted today, I heard a wonderful talk last week by a scientist out here in California. They've been experimenting just spreading compost on pasture land, a 1/4 inch kind of thickness up to a 1/2 inch of compost, and then measuring the effect that has on carbon in the soil. And it's quite incredible,
Yes.
the difference that can make. And you can actually see it from the air. They did controlled experiments, with different rectangles of land in these pastures, and they'd have a control that was not treated, and then a test plot that got the compost, and a test plot that got tilled, and a test plot that got tilled plus the compost. You could tell from the air because the cattle went to the grass that had been on the composted areas. The grass was growing so much better. The cattle broke the blind and told you what the 4 plots were. It's that obvious. It is that obvious. And those plots, much more carbon was going into the soil. So agriculture can be a big part of the solution, but we need to tell McDonald's, stop getting your hamburger from CAFOs, right? There's a different kind of agriculture you're going to have to support, and when you do, I'll be your customer, and when you don't, I won't be your customer, or whatever. I mean, we can do that same thing, applying compost to the soil or to the pasture. You can do with your front lawn. You can do with your vegetable garden. You can put it down with your cover crop. We can do that at small scale. We can encourage your city to do it in its parks. We need to spread ideas like this in a very viral way, and cause the change to happen a lot faster.
You can spread the ideas and spread compost. Well, Bruce, that we have an outstanding example of how, by working with nature, see what I think some people fail to recognize, because again, it's become a kind of a political football. Well, you're for all this stuff, or you're for growth, or you're for the economy, or whatever. The reality is, we're not separate from nature. As someone cogently pointed out, nature happens to own the stadium, and she always bats last. Mm. So either we eventually will come into harmony, and this is what Dr. Shockley said: nature is commanded by obeying her. Mm. You can't command nature by contravening the laws of nature. Right. You do that, and nature will allow you to do your thing until it doesn't, and then your colony collapses, and another species comes up. So we don't want to collapse. We want to be here doing the wonderful things that we do as human beings, having the wonderful experiences we have in community and love and all that. We want the whole thing to work. And so I think Francis Tickey's radiance dairy. Francis was one of the chief scientists in USDA. He has a PhD in soil fertility, went to USDA, and then more than 20 years ago bought a somewhat struggling dairy farm in Fairfield called Radiance Dairy. Moved it to another piece of ground. That piece of ground was hilly, and is often the case, maybe not so much now as before, but for a long time, ground that was not really, didn't even have a great corn suitability rating, was just, was farmed. And a lot of the ground on his thing was down to the red subsoil. There was no topsoil left at all. Well, he has, in the last 20 years, rebuilt a lot of that soil. Now, it's not the same as building eight feet of topsoil, but he has rebuilt the fertility of that soil, doing exactly what you were talking about. He has a herd and he has 60 paddocks, 61-acre paddocks. The cows go in, opens the electric fence, the cows goes in, they eat, and poop.
Then
So it's time to milk again. They go out of that paddock, the fence is closed, and that paddock isn't grazed for another 60 days. Just like the buffalo, when they came through on the plains, they grazed the grass down to about 6 inches and moved on.
Right.
And so all the roots died, and it added humus, and added all of those elements to the soil. Then it grew up again. And Francis has a very successful business. He sells 100% of his product within 4 miles of his dairy. He was one of the first on dairy, the only on-farm dairy processor. Now there's more than a half a dozen. So I'm watching the time here. I'm just having so much fun that, we'll go a little longer than usual. Because if someone isn't interested, well, they can just leave the discussion. But we're having a great time. So let's before we finish up with some ideas about what people can do. Ideas, if you just want to stay in your routine and just change your routine, what are some of the things you can do? If you want to become more active, what are some of the things you can do? But you and Ann, on a wonderful, modest sized house in Pleasanton, California, you have actually created something really amazing, haven't you?
Oh, thank you. I know you've seen it. We call our house Walden Puddle. Little reference to Thoreau, whose Walden Pond was not actually out in the middle of nowhere. It was on the edge of town. So in his day, kind of suburbia.
Yes.
And we live in suburbia, but we wanted to do it a different way. So we have a 49-year-old house that was never built with energy efficiency in mind. And I'm an architect's son. And we decided, well, we'll take this and we'll see what we can do with it. So this house is now close to net zero. We produce more electricity than we use by far. And we use a little bit of natural gas, which I'm still looking at ways to close the natural gas account. We've ripped out all the grass and a lot of the concrete and created habitat, as well as an edible garden. We do this with very little water. We have laundry to landscape and other techniques, drip irrigation where needed, and a lot of native plants that once they're established don't need water. So it's our little oasis, and we call it Walden Puddle because we created sunken paths that when when we finally get rainfall, we keep all that water. We don't let it leave the property. It goes into these sunken paths, and we have a temporary water feature that the birds quite enjoy. So we've tried to, as a demonstration project, show that suburbia can be made more sustainable. And
so Bruce, on that point, so what's happened in your neighborhood with this? What's
the neighborhood? We have. I mean, it's a corner lot, so people see what we've done, and we have influenced some of the neighbors. One who I talked into solar as well, but a lot of the neighbors now are ripping out. I mean, not just because of us, but some of them because of us, ripping out their lawns. putting in native plants, doing some edible gardening as well. And, kind of beyond that. And we considering the size of the plot, we grow a lot of our fruits and vegetables. Maybe a quarter of the fruit and vegetables that we eat are from our own garden. And then about half of the fruit and vegetables we eat are from our CSA box, which is, again, supporting local organic agriculture as much as we can. One writer that I like lives in Kentucky, Wendell Berry.
Yes.
Says eating is an agricultural act, and I think this is something that we can all do. Michael Pollan says, most of us vote 3 times a day for what kind of food supply we want, and if you can make food choices that are supporting a better kind of agriculture, you are part of the solution. And so if you can, at least move a little bit in that direction every year, you are part of that solution. And so that's something we've tried to do. We buy a lot of organic, we buy a lot of local and organic food, when we can't grow it ourselves, and we volunteer at a community garden that grows organic food for the food bank. So we want to share that, benefit of better fruits and vegetables, as widely as possible with people who need it. So I think there are things like that that we can all do on the individual basis. We can, seek out suppliers of electricity that have cleaner sourcing, and make our homes energy efficient so that we don't need to use as much energy to operate them. Again, a lot of this stuff is easy, and
it pays, doesn't it?
Yeah, and it's exactly right. The first couple of times we looked at solar, going back 3-5 years ago, I really couldn't justify it. I was waiting for the prices to come down and the panels to get better, and they did. And now it's not a economic sacrifice, to go to a cleaner system. It's absolutely going to pay back in a reasonable amount of time, the same way that, LED lighting and energy efficient appliances, there's a lot that has good return on investment if that's all you care about. It doesn't have to be a sacrifice.
Well, Bruce, thinking about that, so that's things that we can do on the individual level. It's really, really important. Now, I wanted you to put your chief science guy at Shackley hat on, and what you learned in your many years in other companies. We had a fellow here, Ray Mailer, Dr. Ray Mailer, who during his active medical career was involved in a work comp situation where they had an experience rate that was about $1.3 million worth of usage. And he started to work with, and I don't recall the exact circumstance, started to work with that entity. And what he did is he improved the nutrition of the people who were involved. And these were laborers, truck drivers and folks like that, I believe. So they weren't necessarily intellectuals like you who had a lot of access or time to think about these things. They were eating. And so he just shifted their eating patterns, and that experience rate dropped to about 300,000. Now, if you generalize something like that across all of the population, it's a huge deal. Just getting some more fruits and vegetables into children's diet, their brain development, all of that. So let's talk about that a little bit as an element of sustainability before we kind of go into our final conclusions. And we thank everyone for being so patient and allowing this conversation to run a little bit.
Right. So, unfortunately, our healthcare system doesn't have nutrition and lifestyle as a central pillar. Nutrition and lifestyle will get lip service, but they're really not integrated into the healthcare system, which, as I understand it, was one of the reasons why Dr. Shackley started the corporation in the first place. We're going to need a parallel system because that one over there doesn't have an interest. And there are cracks appearing in that wall, but that's still, I think, generally true. Too many of our physicians have little or no training in nutrition, nor are they compensated for counseling people on nutrition and lifestyle. And it doesn't take a genius to know that probably what you put in your mouth every day has something to do with how healthy you are. And so very few Americans are eating the recommended daily servings of fruit and vegetable, and French fries don't count as a vegetable. I'm sorry.
How about ketchup though? Ketchup.
Yeah. Yeah. So we need to actually get a wide variety of fresh fruits and vegetable, whole grain, legumes, nuts, seeds. A largely plant-based diet, but coming back to the good that the herbivores can do for the topsoil and the carbon in the ground. We don't have to go totally vegan if we don't want to. There's room for animal products in our diet, and fish included in that. For the omega-3, I think is very important. But we need to shift the diet from highly processed food and food that is heavy in red meat, and especially again, meat coming from kind of CAFO operations, into stuff that is being done more sustainably and is significantly more plant-based, and that'll be very good for healthcare costs. I'm sure it would be incredibly good for healthcare costs, because such a diet is giving your body what it actually needs. It's a lot less inflammatory. It is going to allow your body to repair and maintain itself much better than this modern diet that we found ourselves on.
And so when you think about those conclusions and you look at what can happen with local agriculture, hyper-local agriculture, like fruits and vegetables raised at Walden Puddle, to fruits and vegetables that are raised in the environs of Pleasanton or Fairfield or Cincinnati or Boston or San Francisco, we have the capacity to feed ourselves in a much more healthy fashion and do great things for the health of the soil, even if you're not talking about vast swaths of the plains like out here in the Midwest, where we're actually losing our productive capacity to create large amounts of grain, if you will, because topsoil is going away. We can reverse all of that by our actions, and we can encourage that by voting with our dollars in the food. So we search out local food. We search out the food that actually nourishes us, that turns out to be great economically. One of the great lifters of local economics is local foods. Robust local food systems is highly correlated with robust economies locally. And guess what? The national economy and the stock market is not the national economy. 240,000 trades a second is not the national economy. It's really what happens in Main Street. There's a big disconnect of understanding. In fact, I'm going to have Austin Frerick on next week or the week after. He was an economist at Treasury, and we're going to talk about some of these fundamental ideas of what actually is the economy and what actually creates abundance for individuals and communities, because that's really what the country is made of, is individuals and communities. But that's a whole other story. We're not going to go there because we'd be here for another 2 or 3 hours. I could do it, but I doubt if anyone would want to listen that much. So let's finish up, Bruce, by talking about, again, something that maybe some people may not feel comfortable hearing. But as they say, if you want things to really change, don't change your light bulbs, change your laws. The whole idea that a lot of this, the EPA, all of these tremendous organizations that have been built up and have basically made a massive difference in the health of our environment, on and on and on and on. Those are only actions that can be taken collectively. They're only actions that are legislated. Otherwise, people will do whatever the heck they want to do. And as someone said, it is the unseen hand, but government policy pulls the elbow up and sticks it down and points the hand in a particular direction. So let's talk about policy. What should we be looking for if we care about this stuff? What should we be looking for in terms of policy stances that our political leaders, they're in office and aspiring, what should we be looking for?
Well, I'm sure when you have Austin on, he's going to talk about pricing in the externalities of some of the systems that we currently have. But I want to shift back a little bit to what you were saying about the rural economy. I mean, it is a huge problem that the system of agriculture that we have evolved to after the Second World War has destroyed rural communities. This industrial agriculture based on cheap oil and petrochemicals and fertilizer, it has depleted the population of rural communities, in addition to causing a lot of environmental damage in those communities. And we really need to rethink that. And our farmers are in even worse shape right now because of a trade war. Well, the reason that the trade war is not good for our farmers is, they don't grow food for us. If they didn't have to export what they were growing, the trade war wouldn't matter, would it? So we get the majority of the fresh fruit that we eat in this country does not get produced in this country. A third of the vegetables that we eat, the fresh vegetables in this country, are not produced in this country. That's not good. It means they're coming from a long way. Sometimes that's the reason that pests get into the country. Sometimes that's the reason that pesticides that we don't even allow on our food find its way into our food supply. The US military insists that its food supply starts in the United States, but we don't have anything like that for the people of the United States.
Yeah, what do they
and I think we need a partnership. We need a partnership between the American people and the American farmer that says, we want you to produce the food that we want to eat, and we expect you to be paid a fair price for what you're doing. And part of what you are doing is stewardship of the land so that we will always have food. These are not trivial things. I mean, there's no collective of smart kings out there that have saved up 7 years of food for the famine that's to come. There's no Old Testament story here. We have a few weeks of extra food sitting around the world. That's it. We are doing just-in-time delivery of food around the world, and sometimes not in time. So we need a different understanding, a different relationship with our farmers. And, that's one system. I mean, there are challenges ahead for us. We need to change the way that we do agriculture, change the way that we do energy, change the way that we do transportation. I mean, just to pick three.
Right.
And we need to do all those things pretty fast if we want a good world for our grandchildren and their children. It's very important that we not be nonchalant about it. So back to your question then about government. I think at all levels. I recently delighted to have been appointed by the city of Pleasanton to the Energy and in the Environment Committee in Pleasanton. And we are working on issues of energy efficiency and clean energy and water security, which is a big concern out here. We don't have enough water to go around using it the way that we're using it now. So I'm doing what I can on that local level. I write to my Congress critters for whatever good it does. I'm trying to do things on that level. I think individuals have to make the decision of where they're going to invest their time between individual actions and collective actions. But again, both are necessary. It's great if you've replaced your light bulbs with LEDs, but that's not going to save us. That it's a good thing to do. I don't discourage it. It's good for your budget. It's going to save you money. But it's a step. It's a small step in the right direction. But we absolutely have to have collective action as well if we're going to turn this thing around in time. So we need to the extent that individuals can come together and push for some of those bigger changes that are going to be necessary over the next few years. That's what we need.
That's great. Well, you know what, Bruce, because I don't want to go beyond an hour. Well, here we are, almost 3 minutes till. I'm going to ask you to come back at some point, and we'll come back with more areas of policy, looking at the science, looking at economics, looking at all of that, and just talk about what would be optimal. If we had a choice, what would our policy be? If we had a choice here, what would our policy be? What would create the greatest level of good for the greatest number of people, the greatest economic bang for the buck? And there's just so much to talk about with this. So with this, we will wrap up. I'll tell you, I'll leave one little story about our town here in Fairfield, Iowa. Fairfield in 1972 was pretty much like any other little town. And then something happened. The TM organization bought old Parsons College. And boy, it was quite an evolution. But what we have learned how to do here is think together, plan together, and execute those plans, and then plan again and execute those plans. And fortunately, on the local level, there are no, if you're a mayor, you're not running as a party, you're running as a person. Here I am. This is what I believe. This is what I can do. So it makes the local level, particularly on the city level, much easier to do because you don't have a lot of the I would say artificial,
Right.
political debates.
Artificial division, yeah.
Artificial divisions that don't really mean anything. Obviously, people who know me know I tend toward which hand? Left hand. I have very good friends who tend toward the right hand. When I get together with my buddy Roger Voorhees and we talk about things, 95% of everything we totally agree on. And so we have just used that principle to do things together. And as one friend of mine said, fellow board member at the convention center, somehow in Fairfield, if we, whether we're laughing at each other or with each other, we make it work. Right. We get together and we make it work. We make good things happen. So I would say that one of the things that I would recommend to everyone, and anyone who follows my wall, my personal feed, can see videos of us planting the first Lord's Cupboard garden. Now, the Daisy Girl Scouts had it last year, and they decided to take a pass. So we decided to declare it the Lord's Cupboard Garden. And you're involved in community gardens that feed your food bank. The Lord's Cupboard is a statewide food bank system, and it's run beautifully here by Laura Cohen. And she said, you get us fresh stuff that isn't something that no one else wants, and man, it'll fly out of here just like that. There's an almost unlimited appetite, if you will, for good, fresh fruits and vegetables. And if someone doesn't have enough money to buy food or pay their mortgage or keep their lights on or heat their house, they've got a real issue. So we decided to take the Daisy Girl Scouts garden that had been beautifully amended for years with wood chips and then about an 8-inch layer of hay or straw. So when that entire substantially sized garden was planted in one afternoon with plants volunteered from Tiffany Rain's greenhouse, you know how they planted? They pushed the straw aside, moved their hand, put their hand into the soil, dug the soil up, put the plant in. It was just a thrilling experience, but that wasn't the best thing. The best thing was what the volunteers, the handful of volunteers that came out they had an experience. There were two younger women who I don't think had ever, they certainly hadn't eaten a piece of raw asparagus, like a sprig of asparagus, a stalk of asparagus. They are so excited about coming back and working in the garden. The garden is one thing, but the sense of community and feeling that emanated from that was like a way, way bigger thing. So what I suggest to people is find other folks in your community who are working on problems that you resonate with. And just like you became part of the Environmental Council, or you and Ann work on the garden, find something local to get involved with and then get involved. We're not islands. We're in this thing together. And I think if we do that, a lot of the artificial boundaries, the artificial political, noise just goes away. It's not even there. And I think that's a very essential element of us coming together as a country and solving these big macro problems by conditioning our awareness on a local level. So that's my final say. You get your final say, Bruce.
I'm done.
You're done. He was looking at the guy and said, we are done. Okay, so Dr. Bruce Daggy, thank you very, very much.